Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation,
Oh, yeah.
and all the controversy that's been swirling around it. We've got excerpts from the book itself, we've got some critical reviews, and we even took a little peek into some online discussions.
It's so interesting how this book has just become this lightning rod
Yeah.
for conversations about tech and Gen Z and mental health.
Yeah, it's really spurred a lot of debate.
Yeah.
And Haidt's central argument is pretty provocative. He basically comes out and says, smartphones and social media are the main drivers behind this huge surge in teen depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, all this stuff that we've been seeing. And he even points to a statistic that says these issues more than doubled
Really?
between 2010 and 2023 on a lot of these different measures.
That's pretty alarming.
It is. It is. The way he kicks off his book is actually with this really captivating sci-fi story. It's about this kid who's sent on this super dangerous mission to Mars without their parents even knowing about it.
Yeah.
And it really messes them up. And he uses this as like a metaphor
I see.
for how he thinks these tech companies are kind of doing the same thing to kids with smartphones.
So it's like this kind of cautionary tale about the potential impact of technology on young minds.
Exactly. And he really digs into these potential harms. He lays out four main ones: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
So he's not pulling any punches.
No,
No.
he's not. But like with anything this complicated, there's always more to the story.
Right. I mean, we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions. Just because these things are happening at the same time, the rise of smartphones, doesn't necessarily mean one caused the other.
That's a really good point. And that's where the critiques come in Candace Odgers. In her review in Nature, she actually calls Haidt out for making this big, sweeping conclusion based on what she calls unsettled science.
Okay.
And she also points out that there are other things that could be contributing to this.
Yeah.
Like, what about the 2008 financial crisis?
Yeah.
You know,
right. That had a huge impact on families and
Totally.
and the economy and everything.
Absolutely. And then you've got Andrew Przybyłski, who was quoted in Platformer. He basically says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
And he's not convinced.
And he doesn't think Haidt has it.
Okay.
So there's this tension
Right.
between this really compelling narrative that Haidt's putting forward and the need for more solid scientific backing.
Definitely. And then there's the whole COVID-19 pandemic. I mean,
Right.
lockdowns, school closures, that definitely took a toll on teenagers, mental health, social development, academics, even physical health.
Yeah. And The Guardian actually pointed out that Haidt doesn't really address that very much in his book.
So it's almost like this other huge factor.
It is. It is. And it's kind of ironic, isn't it? Like, we're so quick to blame smartphones.
Yeah.
But then you see people online talking about how they're scrolling through Facebook Marketplace at the dinner table, while their boomer parents are on their phones too.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody's pointing fingers. But maybe it's a lot more complicated than just blaming one thing.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot more to unpack here than
Definitely.
just the simple answer.
For sure.
It really does seem like we need to look beyond those simple answers.
Yeah,
And really get into the nuances.
for sure.
But, even though Haidt's book has gotten some criticism, it does bring up some important questions.
It does. It does. And, something that The Guardian pointed out, which I thought was interesting, is that Haidt doesn't really talk much about the potential good things about smartphones and social media
Yeah, that's a good point.
for young people.
Mhm.
Like, what about connecting with communities or expressing your creativity or
Right.
even finding business opportunities? These are real things that a lot of teens experience.
They are, and it's like, it's not all doom and gloom.
Right.
There are definitely some positive aspects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even in Haidt's book, he mentions how teenagers use their phones to organize that global movement against gun violence.
Right. That's a powerful example of how these tools can actually be used for positive change.
Yeah. It's not just about demonizing the technology itself.
Right.
It's about figuring out how to use it responsibly.
Exactly.
And, even though some people disagree with his overall argument, some of Haidt's recommendations actually make a lot of sense, especially when you consider that they're backed up by groups like the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry.
Okay. Like what kind of recommendation?
Well, things like delaying giving kids smartphones or keeping them out of schools or encouraging more unsupervised play and independence.
So kind of like giving kids more space to just be kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And those are things that could really help kids, no matter what your stance is on the whole smartphone debate.
It's interesting, too, how he brings up this idea of anti-fragility.
Yeah, I noticed that.
He borrows it from Nassim Taleb's work. And basically, he's saying that kids need a certain amount of adversity and challenge
Hmm.
to become resilient, just like our immune systems need exposure to germs to develop properly.
So it's kind of like a what doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And he argues that by overprotecting kids
Okay.
from all the bad stuff in the real world and letting them just escape into the digital world, we might actually be making them more fragile in the long run.
Interesting. So he's not saying technology is the enemy.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah,
It's
no.
more like he thinks overprotection might be backfiring.
I see. I see. And he uses the evolution of playgrounds as an example.
Yeah.
You know how playgrounds used to be? With the metal slides and the high monkey bars.
Oh, yeah, those were the
They
days.
were practically designed for risk-taking.
Right. And now everything's all padded and sanitized.
Exactly. So is he saying we should go back to those dangerous playgrounds?
Well, he doesn't say that specifically, but he does point out that today's playgrounds don't really give kids the same opportunities to push their limits or learn to control their bodies or experience that thrill of a little bit of danger.
Right, right. And it all ties into his argument about the decline of play-based childhood.
Exactly. He thinks that unstructured, unsupervised play, where kids can create their own games and rules and figure out social dynamics, is really important for developing all kinds of skills.
Like what?
Like emotional regulation, problem solving, all that good stuff.
Okay.
And he believes that kind of play has been declining for decades.
Mhm.
First, because of things like more academic pressure or changes in how cities are designed.
Yeah.
And now it's being taken over by what he calls a phone-based childhood.
So basically, he's saying smartphones are like the final nail in the coffin for good old-fashioned play.
Kind of, yeah. But it's not all doom and gloom. He does have some suggestions for what we can do about it.
Okay, so what's the solution? Do we throw away all our phones and ship our kids off to the woods?
Well, he doesn't suggest anything quite that drastic.
Correct.
One of his key recommendations is to delay smartphone use as long as possible.
Okay.
He thinks parents and schools should work together to create a culture where it's not weird or isolating for kids, especially in elementary and middle school, to not have smartphones.
That's a tough one, though.
It is, especially with how young some kids are getting phones these days.
Exactly.
He's also a big advocate for phone-free schools
Okay.
and bringing back more unstructured playtime.
Like recess.
Exactly. But those are big societal changes that would take a lot of people working together.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What about on a more individual level? What can parents do?
He encourages parents to model healthy tech habits themselves and to do things with their kids that encourage connection and creativity.
So it's less about demonizing technology.
Right.
And more about finding that healthy balance.
Exactly. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth striving for.
Yeah, it seems like he's really pushing for us to change how we think about kids in technology.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad, you know? It's up to us to decide how we want to use it and what kind of world we want for our kids.
So what do you think? Where do you stand on all of this? Do you buy into Haidt's argument? And if you do, what are you actually willing to do about it?
Oh, man. Those are the big questions, aren't they? And there's no easy answers. It's clear, though, that we need more research, more honest conversations, and a lot more critical thinking about how tech is impacting us, especially young people.
It's like we're at a crossroads. Do we just embrace all this technology and accept the good and the bad that comes with it? Or do we try to put the genie back in the bottle and limit how much exposure we have to it? Especially for kids.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Because technology is here to stay. It's only going to become more a part of our lives. So maybe instead of thinking about it as an either kind of thing, the real question is how can we live with technology in a way that actually benefits us and that we can sustain?
Maybe it's about finding that balance where we're using technology to improve our lives, but not letting it take over.
Right. Exactly. It takes a real shift in how we think about it. You know, we have to understand that technology itself isn't good or bad. It's really just a reflection of the choices we make and what we value. If we use it mindfully and with intention, and we really think about its potential impact, it can be this incredible force for good. But if we let it control us and shape how we see things and just consume all of our attention, then we risk becoming slaves to what we created.
Haidt really emphasizes how important it is to wait as long as possible before giving kids smartphones. He even suggests that parents and schools should try to make it normal, where it's not weird or isolating for kids, especially those in elementary and middle school, to not have smartphones.
He's also all about having schools that are completely phone-free and bringing back more time for kids to just play without any structure, no matter where you stand on this whole technology debate. Those are things that could be really positive for how kids develop and just for their well-being overall.
This deep dive has just scratched the surface of this whole topic. It's complicated. We've gone over Haidt's arguments, the criticisms against them, and some potential solutions. But the real important questions are the ones you're going to keep asking yourself long after this deep dive is over.
Because this isn't just some theoretical discussion. It's about what kind of future we're creating for ourselves, our kids, and even the generations after them. And that's a conversation that's worth having. We need to do it thoughtfully, honestly, with open minds, and be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
You've been listening to another deep dive. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we discussed today. And let us know what you think about all this. Head over to our website or find us on social media and join the conversation.